Today, playing a Dark Magician deck can be difficult and even frustrating to play against top-tier decks, but the deck is periodically updated with new and better cards like Magician's Souls and Red Eye's Dark Dragoon, which begs the question, could a Dark Magician deck actually be a top-tier deck? The series will start with us building a baseline deck profile, and in each episode we will duel against random decks in 3 best-of-3 match duels. As we duel, we will discuss and analyze the plays, and in the following episode, we'll either keep the deck as is or adjust it to try and make it better. We will repeat this process, producing various deck profiles while incorporating your feedback with ours to try and make the ultimate Dark Magician deck for the current format. Guys, welcome back to episode 2 of the Dark Magician Deck Builder series. Episode 1 was pretty much as successful as we had hoped it could be. We also collected all your feedback and your comments. Thank you for that, guys. And we hit 1,000 subscribers.
Yay!
Thank you guys so much.
So there will be a few changes in this episode. First, we're going to do just a single match instead of 3, showing you 1 duel out of it. So you'll get to see all 3 duels for this match. We also read the comments and we have some feedback that we're going to share with you guys. We asked you your input and we considered all that when we were making changes to the deck. Is there a reason you don't want to play Keeper of Dragon Magic? Its effect can be very useful. It's a dragon you can use to fusion, and if you don't use its effect, you can use it to get Anaconda.
It's not that I don't want to play it, it's that I didn't remember about that card. So the last time I used it was many years ago, and we're actually putting it back in the deck because it turns out I've been playing a lot with the pre-release support for Dark Magician that's coming out in future sets, and the Tamias Dragon that's coming out is very similar. And so it is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to be able to turbo out Dark Magician the Dragon Knight, which is our goal. And so it is going to be going back in the deck.
Also, add in Spellbook Engine for Dark Magician. Way more consistency in each duel.
So my first deck profile I did was a Dark Magician Spellbook deck, and that is absolutely true. It's a really consistent deck, and it's got tons of drawing power, and it's really great. Unfortunately, in the competitive space, though, draw power alone isn't enough, and there isn't a lot of room in a Spellbook Engine deck to add in things like negates, hand traps, and so it's really difficult to play competitively. So for those reasons, we took it out, and we're not going in that direction.
I would remove Magician of Dark Illusion for a second Red Eyes Fusion because it's going to get ashed. I would add in 2 Solemn Strikes instead of Blackstone of Legend and drop the 1 Impermanence for 1 Magician Navigation. I would remove 1 Forbidden Droplet for a Harpy's Feather Duster for those heavy back row, and that's mostly it from me.
Okay, so I'll break that down. So there's a lot of changes there. So we're not ready to remove Magician Dark Illusion just yet, simply because I want to show you guys why I think it can be so good in the deck. But only at 1 copy though. We don't probably ever run 2 or 3. Although I know most Dark Magician players don't run that particular card. I do think it can create some good combos and things like that. For 2 Solemn Strikes instead of 1 Blackstone of Legend and 1 Imperm for 1 Navigation. So Solemn Strike is a really good card. I have played it a lot in Dark Magician. As a matter of fact, my first Spellbook deck had Solemn Strike as one of the negates. But I'm not ready to remove Blackstone Legend either because for the same reason, it's a dragon monster that we can normal summon, also use to get Red Eye's Black Dragon, also use to get Verte, also use to get level 1 Exes monsters. So right now I feel it's kind of integral to the deck, and you can recycle Red Eye's Black Dragon from the grave back into the deck and also get Blackstone Legend back to the hand for discarding for Dragoon's Negate. And the recycling piece is really important because if we do, like what was suggested, add 2 Red Eyes Fusions in, recycling Red Eyes Black Dragon in the deck would give us the opportunity to add a second Dragoon to the extra deck. So I feel like it's kind of an underrated card. I wouldn't run maybe 2 or 3 copies of it, so that might change. As far as the Imperm for 1 Magician Navigation, Magician Navigation is one of those cards where honestly, unless you're running 3 copies of it, I think if you were to document all the duels you do and the number of times you use Navigation's negate abilities, it's probably not that many. I find that when I use it, it's mostly ends up getting discarded to the graveyard, and the opportunity to use the negate is not necessarily there. So it's a very specific card. But I'm not against having it in the deck. I think it does have somewhat of a purpose, and I guess we could see where that goes. And then I think the third one was You said removing one forbidden droplet for Harpy's Feather Duster. I wouldn't do that simply for the fact that every duel we played so far, forbidden droplet has been a key card in winning those duels, especially in the competitive space. You have to have a way to negate the effects of things you can't target, and dropping their attack in half it allows us to barrel over them through battle with lower monsters like Magician's Rod. And then the last reason I wouldn't do that right now is simply because we didn't talk about it in episode 1, but Harpy's Feather Duster belongs in the side deck. And we're going to talk about the side deck in this episode, because basically there's no guarantee that the deck you're playing against is going to be a heavy back row, so we don't want to take up space from the main deck with a specific card. So it'll go on the side deck, and then if we're in a match duel with somebody where they are playing back row, we will main deck it from the side deck on match 2. Or duel 2 of the match.
Another person followed up on that comment with, exactly. Also, they need to drop the other unnecessary cards that's clogging the deck. Reason why it doesn't play well.
Well, you have to define what unnecessary is in the deck. And also keep in mind, guys, that there is no one perfect deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! A competitive deck, a good win ratio is actually probably 60% win ratio. Decks aren't out there getting like 100% win ratio. And you could have a similar win ratio with one deck, one variant of a deck, as with another variant of the same archetype. So like Spellbook Engine and another variant, you could have the same win ratio. So you have to define what's necessary. And in the competitive space, you have to be careful, because we have to find a balance of what's necessary and counter cards, hand traps, things like Forbidden Droplet, back row removal, Harpy's Feather Duster, because the competitive space is a little different. The Dark Magician archetype by itself cannot be competitive.
Focusing on Dragon Knight over Dragoon might be a better idea, because the meta players expect you to focus on Dragoon as a win condition, so you being able to try and turbo out Dragon Knight to make a board that's harder to get over than just Dragoon is a better option. If you can try and go for Dragoon but don't sacrifice the board lock while doing so, because importantly, Dark Magician is still a control-based deck even with all the new support and boss monsters coming out.
Yeah, so whoever's comment that is, if you're watching, you totally get it. So my view of the Dark Magician deck, based on thousands of duels, frankly, is Dark Magician the Dragon Knight is still probably the best win condition possible if you can achieve it. There's no counter, or it's very difficult to remove that board lock between Dark Magician Dragon Knight and Eternal Soul. Every duel I've played where I've done a board lock like that has been a win. It's very rarely that I've ever lost with that. Dragoon, even Dark Magician Dragon Knight, can be easily overcome with kaijus and stuff like that, but the difference is you can constantly keep bringing Dark Magician the Dragon Knight back. So it's so good, and that's pretty much what we're trying to accomplish with the deck, which goes along with one of the other comments about Keeper Dragon Magic and putting him in so we can try and turbo out Dark Magician Dragon Knight. It's also, Dragoon is very, as powerful as he is, and is probably one of the most hated cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, I would say. Although I hate Ultimate Conductor Tyranno from Dino decks more than I hate Dragoon. I think the win condition is definitely Dark Magician Dragon Knight.
Well, first of all, remove all the unnecessary non-specific cards that aren't DM. Second, remove all the hand traps, it's pointless. Third, your stable should be 3 copies of 9 cards.
Yeah, it depends on what world you're living in and playing in. If that's not wrong. So like Dragon Link, as an example, doesn't need hand traps and negates because it can just play through anything. Dark Magician with the Spellbook Engine can be similar to that, but where it really lacks is if you're playing somebody good and they negate your draws, you can't play through it as well. So that depends. As far as dumping all the hand traps, it's pointless. I guess that depends if we're talking competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Or casual Yu-Gi-Oh! Because if you're playing in the competitive space, if you can't stop your opponent, depending on what deck you're playing, you're going to lose. There's nothing you can do with the Dark Magician deck to overcome some of these decks that, like, if you don't stop their key play, like Tri-Brigade or Sky Strikers or Dino deck as an example, they're just going to barrel over you in the next turn and it doesn't even matter. There's also a lot of decks that play during your turn, so dumping all the hand traps as being just purely pointless, I mean, I guess that depends if you're talking about like replacing them with other types of things like Solemn Strike instead. But if you're saying just remove all the counter cards from the deck, I don't see how that's particularly helpful. And then the last part about the staples being 3 copies of 9, I disagree with that to some extent, because if you're playing in a competitive space, you have Soul Servant, you can top deck Dark Magical Circle and Eternal Soul from your grave back to your deck. You have ways to get them back, so you don't necessarily need 3. And so, I don't know. That one can be up for debate. I'm not against 3 copies of 3, but he said 9 cards, so that's insinuating, Magical Circle and Eternal Soul would be 6, and then what is he talking about for the other 3? Don't know. You have to be more specific, but like everything, guys, there's no one perfect deck, but what we are trying to do is focus on turboing Dark Magician, the Dragon Knight, and then Dragoon is the focus of the deck, and so we have to find the right balance to get there.
I've found success with 2 Dark Magician, 3 Rod, 3 Soul, 0 to 1 Apprentice, 1 to 2 Circle, 1 to 2 Eternal Soul, 3 Soul Servant, 1 Secrets of Dark Magic as a base. I think people forget they're able to add Dark Magician cards from the grave to the top of the deck with Soul Servant, so you don't necessarily need 3 of the core cards.
Right, so that's just what I explained in the previous comment, is Soul Servant is new, it exists. Maybe you don't have Soul Servant because you didn't get a chance to open Magical Hero booster boxes or packs. It's actually somewhat of a pricey card, I think. Still like a $20 card, maybe more. So if you can't get Soul Servant, then absolutely run 3 copies of the main cards. If you have 3 copies of Soul Servant, I agree with that guy. Absolutely, you can get away probably with 2 Circle, 2 Eternal Soul. 1 Secrets of Dark Magic, same thing, because we're also going to be running Red Eyes Fusion, possibly Polymerization with Keeper of the Dragon Magic. So 3 copies of that. I pretty much agree with his ratio, although I have found that if you run 3 copies of Secrets of Dark Magic, then you can fusion summon for the Dark Magicians much earlier in the duel, which can help you then draw and combo off. But I pretty much agree with what that guy's saying, 110%.
Now let's actually make the changes to the deck. First, we're going to make a very bold move that's also very controversial. We're actually going to remove 1 copy of Dark Magician. Keep in mind, Magician of Dark Illusion acts as a 3rd copy of Dark Magician when on the field. Now that's not very good by itself, but also remember that we can get Dark Magician back from the graveyard at any time using Soul Servant to put him back on the top of the deck. Combine that with Eternal Soul, allowing us to special summon Dark Magician from either our hand or graveyard. Running 3 doesn't seem all that critical, and I've played countless of duels at 2, and the deck seems to run just fine without it. You do run a small risk if you get your Dark Magician banished, but for the most part, if we achieve our deck strategy of board lock, that's very unlikely to happen. The next few changes to the deck are going to help us make room for the core strategy. We're going to take the Blackstone of Legend from 2 to 1. Even though it's a dragon type monster that we can use for a fusion summon, we need to make room for some better cards. Next, we're going to remove Lightning Storm from the deck entirely. Lightning Storm is an interesting card that doesn't work well in Dark Magician because its activation condition requires we have no face-up cards on the field. For that reason, we're more than likely to have Dark Magical Circle or Eternal Soul face up on the field, and therefore when we have the opportunity to activate Lightning Storm, more than likely we're not going to be able to do it. Next, we're also going to remove Cosmic Cyclone. That can go into the side deck. There's no guarantee we're always going to be running against a spell or trap heavy or back row heavy deck, and therefore can be better off in the side deck than our main deck, leaving room for some better cards that contribute to what we're trying to achieve. Next, for the same reasons, we're going to drop Forbidden Droplet down to 1 card. Now, I'd prefer to keep it at 3 just because it's such a good card that actually won us a bunch of duels, but we're going to go ahead and go to 2. I feel that's okay, and if it turns out to be a bad move, we can always add that 3rd copy back in. Next, we're going to remove 1 copy of Infinite Imperm because we also have Effect Failure in the deck, which basically does the same thing. And lastly, from the deck, we're going to remove our copy of Link Spider, making 1 slot available in the extra deck. We don't really need Link Spider because we're running Imduck, which is basically the same thing, meaning we can use Dark Magician as the material for the Link summon. Now let's add the cards to the deck that we want to add. The first change to the deck is we're going to add a 2nd copy of Red Eyes Fusion. It is true that it's very likely to get Ash Blossomed on turn 1 if we happen to start with it. it's also very likely that our Verte is going to get negated at some point, and so having a backup in the deck is actually a pretty good idea. Next, we're going to back it up with one copy of Called by the Grave. This is really to mitigate Ash Blossom. If they happen to Ash our Red Eyes Fusion, we can make sure that we time it by having Called by the Grave in hand or on the field to make sure that our play goes through. Next, we're going to add one additional copy of Dark Magical Circle. This is going to help us search our core Dark Magician cards. Especially on turn 1, it's very important that we get our board set up as much as possible. Next, we're going to add one copy of Magician Navigation. Now for me, this is a controversial addition to the deck. I don't really feel like it's that useful of a card for the purpose of special summoning Dark Magician from your hand and then another spellcaster from the deck, but it is true that with Magician Souls, we can simply discard it to the graveyard to draw cards, and then if we get Dark Magician on the field, it becomes a spell or trap negate. On the plus side, the first effect becomes really a bonus at that point. So for that reason, we'll go ahead and add one copy, but I'm kind of a little iffy on it. The last two changes to the deck are going to be, we're going to add Slacker Magician to the extra deck. This is going to help us utilize our level 1 monsters a little bit better. Slacker Magician, once per turn, cannot be destroyed by battle, and during either player's turn, if a card or effect is activated that targets Slacker Magician, we can detach a material, negate the activation, and destroy that card. More so, it's really the first effect that's more useful here. If we're in a position where we can exit summon for it using the Blackstone Legend or Effect Failure or Magician's Souls, we can actually use it to battle, prevent it from getting destroyed, and use it to exit summon up to Zeus. The next addition to the deck, and the last one, is going to be adding one copy of Polymerization and 3 copies of Keeper of Dragon Magic. As we discussed, I didn't really remember about this card, but it's actually a really good one. It's not as good as I would like it to be, but it is a dragon monster that we can normal summon. It allows us to search Polymerization from our deck to our hand. We can also search Red Eyes Fusion. We can also special summon Dark Magician or Red Eyes Black Dragon from our graveyard, and ultimately it helps us turbo out Dark Magician, the Dragon Knight, or Dragoon. The only downside that it has to the deck is if you start with it and Magician's Rod, you have a competing conflict of interest on which one you want to use, so then you have to base it on the situation. It's also easily negated and has a drawback of not being able to special summon anything other than fusion monsters from the extra deck that turn use any of its effects, but it still today in the current format is probably the best card to help us get Dark Magician the Dragon Knight out on the field as soon as possible. To wrap up the deck at this point, let's take one moment to talk about the side deck. We completely left it out in episode 1, but it actually was there and we meant to talk about it. The side deck basically now consists of some of the cards we removed from the main deck, such as our 3rd copy of Dark Magician, Harpy's Feather Duster, Cosmic Cyclone, Forbidden Droplet, and Infinite Imperm. The side deck has always contained 3 copies of Nibiru, 3 copies of Ghost Bell, and 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird. The important thing that I want to point out here is you absolutely need a side deck in competitive play. Depending on the deck you're playing, you are going to be swapping out cards. For example, you might need to swap out Ash Blossom with Nibiru for decks that are going to be special summoning a lot where they don't have a specific key card that's part of their play. Or you might need to swap out for Ghost Bell for graveyard-heavy decks such as Eldritch, or maybe you need to main deck Droll and Lockbird to prevent your opponent from searching cards from their deck and adding them to their hand at all. Either way, we have a side deck that facilitates a variety of different decks we're going to play against, and we can always swap out cards on the second duel of any match depending on our opponent.
It's time to duel!
Red Eyes Black Dragon, not really the first card you want to see turn 1.
I should have summoned Magician's Rod instead of Keeper of Dragon Magic because his activation condition is win instead of Keeper of Dragon Magic's activation condition is if. This may actually be where I lost the duel because he activated Prank Kid's Battle Butler's effect before I had turned player priority because the if versus the win, so I couldn't use Keeper of the Dragon Magic's effect. So Rod would have actually been the better choice because his effect would have still resolved, even though he would have been board wiped, and then I could have searched for Secrets of Dark Magic, and then I could have actually fusion summoned for Dragoon or Dark Magician the Dragon Knight using Keeper of the Dragon Magic as the dragon material, and that would have made all the difference in the world.
It can be hard when there's a time crunch to be able to make that real strategic play because you're thinking through so many different things at once and you know that something has to be done.
We also had just changed the deck and added Keeper Dragon Magic in there, so I didn't remember about the activation condition, when versus if, until it was too late.
Again, we have Red Eyes Black Dragon. Clearly you don't need 3 copies of some cards in the deck because they just keep showing up.
Opening hand wasn't too great, so summoning Keeper Dragon Magic was my only move, and because I had called by the grave in hand, Red Eyes Fusion was definitely the choice to make, so I could be ready for my follow-up turn.
So David chose to use Red Eyes Black Dragon as the cost to be able to search for REF when he could have used Soul Servant, but it worked out because he used the other effect of Keeper Dragon Magic to be able to special summon Red Eyes Black Dragon from the grave and face down defense. Thankfully, on the next turn for his opponent, it had enough defense that it did not get taken off the board.
My opponent summoned Totally Awesome, and I hate that card, but I was set up with Called by the Grave, and I knew that was probably his only Aqua monster on the field and also in his hand. And so I did go ahead and activate Red Eyes Fusion, get Dragoon, and I was able to actually negate his Totally Awesome's negate effect with Called by the Grave, banishing it from the field. It worked out pretty sweet.
So David's opponent was able to drop Dragoon's attack by 500 using their field spell when they linked summon. And then they brought out Rocket Ride, which had the same attack now, and so not looking too good for Dragoon.
Alright, so this is where I had to get a little crafty. So I activated my Infinite Imperm, and it wasn't about negating his cards, I negated my own Imperm, which would give Dragoon that 1000 attack boost so he wouldn't be destroyed by battle during my opponent's following turn.
So even though David's opponent now took the time to trash talk him and tell him he was a bad player, Dragoon had more attack and they had nothing they could do. David was going to win the next turn anyway.
And then, funny enough, which happened to me before in episode 1, I actually won the duel because the clock ran out on my opponent.
Finally, no Red Eyes Black Dragon! And it's a pretty good hand to start with.
So I knew my opponent was running Ash Blossom, so it was a calculated risk to activate Red Eyes Fusion on the first turn, but it was either let him negate Red Eyes Fusion or let him negate Dark Magical Circle. If he negated Red Eyes Fusion, then I could still do Dark Magical Circle and Soul Servant for Secrets of Dark Magic, but if he negated Dark Magical Circle, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So what I was trying to do is in the follow-up turn, either way, special summon the Dark Magicians and Magician Dark Illusion. So it really didn't matter whether he negated Red Eyes Fusion or not, and we knew we had a second one in the deck as well.
For someone who was talking crap in the last duel, they just quit pretty quick.
This is where I was really sad for you guys because this was going to be the duel where I could show you exactly why we're running Magician and Dark Illusion in the deck during our opponent's turn. Guys, we hope you enjoyed episode 2 of the Dark Magician Deck Builder series. We sure had a lot of fun doing this and we're super excited to work on episode 3.
So keep your eye out. Remember, episode 3 won't have any changes to the deck. It'll just be against a different deck and you will be able to give your input about what cards you think work.
And guys, make sure to hit that like button. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. And guys, we will see you
Next time.
Bye guys.